The sun was blazing over the quiet suburban neighborhood. A perfect Saturday morning. Except for me. My hands trembled as I stared at the locked gate, the keypad blinking mockingly, denying me entry to my own home. It had started innocently enough. A disagreement with the HOA over minor rules, some misplaced flower pots, a fence painted the wrong shade, and a complaint about my dog barking too much. But what began as trivial complaints escalated quickly. Threats followed, then fines, and finally the ultimate humiliation. They had blocked my access entirely, claiming it was for the safety and compliance of the neighborhood. I tried calling, pleading, explaining, but the HOA board was unmoved. They were smug, confident in their power, and cruelly meticulous. Every attempt to regain access was met with silence or a new violation notice. Neighbors peeked over fences, whispering to each other. Some avoided eye contact, fearful of angering the HOA. A few offered sympathetic nods, but no one dared confront the bullies directly. I felt trapped, powerless, and furious. This was my home, the place I had worked hard to maintain, and now I couldn't even step through my own front door. But I had one advantage they didn't know about: family, and not just any family. The one person who could turn this nightmare into an unforgettable lesson in justice. As I waited outside my locked home, thinking of what to do next, my phone buzzed with a message from my brother. "I heard what happened. Don't worry, I'm coming." The thought of him arriving filled me with a mix of hope and anticipation. I knew the HOA had underestimated him. They had counted on my isolation, my inability to fight back. But justice has a way of coming from the last place anyone expects. By the time my brother arrived, the atmosphere shifted. The air of superiority the HOA bullies had carried evaporated. They did not anticipate the authority, calm confidence, and sharp intellect he brought with him. Documents were pulled, procedures were scrutinized, and every violation they had cited was exposed as petty, exaggerated, or outright illegal. What had started as a humiliating experience turned into a spectacle of accountability. The neighbors who had watched in fear now watched in awe. Bullies, once so confident, were rendered powerless by the sheer force of truth and the unexpected arrival of someone with the power to enforce it. By the end of the day, my gate was unlocked, my home was safe, and the HOA, they would never underestimate anyone again. This story is more than a tale of revenge. It's a reminder that sometimes the person you least expect is the one who brings justice, and that courage combined with support can turn even the darkest situation around. The sun had barely risen over the quiet suburban streets, painting the neighborhood in soft morning light when I stepped outside to tend to my garden. For years, this home had been my sanctuary. Its white picket fence, perfectly manicured lawn, and the small maple tree in the front yard weren't just decorations. They were a reflection of the care, love, and countless hours I had poured into this place. Every corner of the house held a memory. Birthday parties with neighbors, quiet evenings on the porch, and countless mornings watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee in hand. I had always taken pride in keeping my property in pristine condition. The lawn was mowed every week, the flower beds blooming with seasonal color, and even the paint on the shutters gleamed under the sun. But despite all this effort, the HOA had begun targeting me. It started with seemingly harmless letters. The fence color does not meet community standards. Flower pots must be rearranged for compliance. Pet owners are responsible for any excessive noise. At first, I brushed it off. Minor infractions, easy to fix. I rearranged the flower pots, repainted the fence, and politely reminded my dog to be quiet when neighbors were nearby. I assumed the HOA simply wanted uniformity, nothing malicious. But as the weeks passed, the tone of the notices changed. Words like violation, penalty, and non-compliance began appearing, each letter more aggressive than the last. Fines arrived in the mail, small at first, then larger, each stamped with bold red ink. The once friendly community organization had transformed into a relentless force, scrutinizing every detail of my property with the precision of a hawk. I tried reasoning with them, emails, phone calls, even in-person visits to the HOA office. Nothing worked. The board members, particularly one woman who seemed to relish her authority, dismissed my explanations with a cold, practiced smile. "Rules are rules," she said, her tone sharp and condescending. "Compliance is mandatory." The neighbors noticed, of course. At first, they whispered as I walked by, offering polite sympathy from behind hedges or curtains. Some avoided eye contact entirely, fearful of attracting the HOA's attention. Only a few gave me quiet nods of encouragement, their eyes reflecting the frustration and helplessness they felt watching me struggle. And then came the moment I hadn't imagined. The keypad at my gate, my literal gateway into my home, was disabled. I entered my code repeatedly, each time greeted with a harsh red light and the same cruel message, "Access denied." I stepped back, heart pounding. My own home had been turned against me. I called the HOA office, demanding answers, but the line went unanswered. I sent emails, visited the office again, and yet the board refused to respond. Every attempt at communication only seemed to embolden them, as if they were daring me to challenge their authority. The humiliation cut deeper than I expected. This wasn't just a petty dispute about a fence or flower pots anymore. It was a power struggle. The HOA had decided to assert dominance, to make me feel small, invisible, and powerless. My home, a place that had always offered comfort and security, had become a prison. I stood outside the gate, hands trembling, staring at the keypad like it had betrayed me. The thought that someone, these petty bullies in suits and polos, could control my access to my own property made my blood boil. I realized then that this wasn't just about rules. This was about control, and they had underestimated me. But even in that moment of despair, a sliver of hope remained. I knew one thing they didn't. Help could come from the last person they expected. And when that help arrived, the consequences for the HOA bullies would be nothing short of shocking. The denial of access to my own home was just the beginning. What started as petty complaints over flower pots and fences had now become a daily nightmare. Every attempt I made to regain control of my property was met with cold, calculated resistance. From the HOA, they were relentless, and their methods grew increasingly absurd. I received notices almost daily. Some were legitimate sounding, citing minor violations. Others were outright ridiculous. Grass must be trimmed to exactly 2.5 inches. Mailbox color does not meet aesthetic standards. Unauthorized decorations in yard. Each fine carried heavy fees, and some were backdated, piling up into a staggering total. Phone calls went unanswered, and emails bounced back with automated responses. Even when I visited the HOA office in person, the board members barely looked up from their desks. Their smiles were smug, almost mocking, as if they were daring me to challenge them. The woman who had first targeted me, the one everyone now whispered about behind closed doors, seemed to take pleasure in my helplessness. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, and said, "Compliance is mandatory. If you cannot follow the rules, we will enforce them." Isolation became suffocating. Neighbors who once waved or offered friendly nods now avoided me, afraid of drawing the HOA's attention. Whispers followed me down the street. "She's asking for trouble. They're just doing their job." I wouldn't want to be in her shoes. It felt as though the entire neighborhood had turned a blind eye to the injustice, leaving me completely alone. The tension escalated further when they began posting signs near my property, warning others, "Violation notice, do not enter." It wasn't just about locking me out anymore. It was public humiliation, a show of power meant to intimidate not only me, but anyone who might support me. I tried legal channels. I looked up local property laws and HOA regulations. Every form, every document, every phone call seemed like a maze designed to frustrate me. The more I fought, the more the fines increased. Each day the gate remained locked. My sense of violation and anger deepened. The worst part was the feeling of powerlessness. This was my home, the place where I had spent years building memories and security, and now I had no control. The bullies on the HOA board seemed untouchable, confident in their authority, and completely unaware of the storm they were about to awaken. Despite the fear, I started documenting everything. I filmed the locked gate, saved every letter, every email, every fine. I kept detailed notes about each interaction with the HOA. Deep down, I knew I couldn't win alone, but evidence would be my weapon when the right help arrived. And help would come from someone they never expected. As the days passed, I could feel the tension mounting, not just in me, but in the neighborhood. Whispers of sympathy began to grow into murmurs of outrage. People were starting to notice. The bullies had assumed I was powerless, that I would quietly accept their tyranny. But I had a plan, and it involved more than just me fighting back. By the end of this chapter, it became clear. The HOA had miscalculated. They had pushed too far, underestimated the strength of family, and awakened a force that would turn the tables completely. The stage was set for a dramatic reveal, where justice would come not from me alone, but from the last person the HOA ever expected, someone with authority, insight, and the power to make them pay for their arrogance. The morning felt unusually quiet, almost oppressive. I approached my front gate, hoping, foolishly, that maybe, just maybe, they had relented. The keypad blinked red. Access denied. This time, it wasn't just a passive act of control. It was an outright declaration of war. The HOA had escalated from petty fines to full exclusion from my own property. They had even posted official-looking signs at the entrance. Property access restricted. Non-compliance with HOA regulations. The letters on the signs were bold, intimidating and seemingly designed to humiliate. I tried calling them again. The phone rang endlessly, only to be answered by cold, clipped messages from board members who seemed to relish my frustration. "You are in violation. Your access remains restricted until further notice," one said, voice dripping with smugness. Panic threatened to set in. My home, everything I had worked for, was now completely out of reach. My neighbors watched from behind hedges and blinds. Some gave sympathetic glances, but none intervened. It was as if the entire community had been silenced. Afraid to challenge the HOA's authority, I felt anger and helplessness collide in a knot in my stomach. How could people get away with this? How could an organization dictate access to your own home? Each day that passed, the humiliation and frustration deepened, and I realized that this wasn't about rules or regulations anymore. It was about power. Then came a small glimmer of hope. My phone buzzed with a message from my brother. I heard what happened. I'm on my way. The thought of him coming filled me with both relief and anticipation. I knew the HOA had underestimated him completely. They assumed I was alone, isolated, powerless. They had no idea that the person arriving at my gate carried not only authority, but the ability to bring their abuse crashing down. By mid-afternoon, he arrived, dressed in a sharp suit that radiated authority. He stepped calmly onto my driveway, his expression neutral but commanding. The board members' smug smiles faltered as he approached. They had expected me, an isolated homeowner, but not him. not someone with the knowledge, credibility, and influence to immediately challenge every claim they had made. Neighbors began to peek out from behind curtains and fences. Cameras flashed. Phones were raised. Word spread quickly through the community that someone significant had arrived to confront the HOA. He methodically reviewed each violation, each fine, and each notice. Every overreach, every technicality, every backdated fee was exposed as petty, exaggerated, or illegal. The HOA bullies tried to argue, tried to maintain their dominance, but it was no use. Every tactic they had relied on to intimidate me had just been dismantled in plain sight. The tension was electric. The neighbors, who had once been silent, now murmured support, their fear turning into awe. The HOA board members, once smug and unchallenged, were cornered, their authority crumbling in real time. By the end of the day, the gate was unlocked. My home was finally mine again. The humiliation, fear, and anger that had consumed me for weeks began to lift. What had started as an unbearable nightmare had transformed into a moment of vindication, and the community had witnessed it all. The breaking point wasn't just the physical act of being locked out. It was the realization that bullies, no matter how confident, can be exposed when the right person steps in, and it set the stage perfectly for the dramatic reveal and twist that would leave everyone shocked and the HOA utterly humbled. The air was thick with tension as my brother stepped forward, his calm authority filling the driveway. The HOA bullies, who had smirked just hours earlier, now looked uneasy, glancing nervously at each other. Their confidence had evaporated in the face of someone they hadn't anticipated. He began by reviewing each notice, each fine, and every action the HOA had taken against me. One by one, he dismantled their claims with meticulous evidence, time-stamped photographs, emails, official HOA regulations, and records proving that the violations were either exaggerated, backdated, or completely fabricated. According to your own rules, he said, voice steady and commanding, these fines are invalid. The property access restrictions are unlawful. Every action taken against this homeowner violates the principles of fair governance you claim to uphold. The board tried to interrupt, their voices rising in frustration, but he silenced them with a single gesture. The neighbors, who had been watching in quiet awe, began to whisper among themselves. Realizing the scale of the HOA's overreach, some raised their phones, filming the confrontation as it unfolded, ensuring that the HOA's actions could not hide behind walls or desks. Then came the moment that truly stunned everyone. A former HOA employee stepped forward from the crowd. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice was clear. I can confirm it. The board intentionally targeted this property. They admitted privately that the homeowner's absence made her the perfect victim. Everything was manipulated to force fines and restrictions unjustly. Gasps filled the air. The smug smiles of the HOA members vanished. Their authority, which had seemed untouchable, was crumbling. They tried to argue, but every claim was met with facts, evidence, and the unwavering presence of my brother. He addressed the neighbors directly. This is a clear example of abuse of power. The actions taken against this homeowner were not only unfair, they were illegal. No organization, regardless of its size, can bully someone out of their home without consequence. By the end of the confrontation, the gate was unlocked, access fully restored, and the HOA board left speechless. They had underestimated the power of truth and authority combined. The very people they thought they controlled, the residents, were now witnesses to their corruption and abuse. The twist was complete. Justice came not from me alone, but from the last person the HOA expected. Their overconfidence had led them to target the wrong homeowner at the wrong time, and in doing so, They exposed themselves to public scrutiny, shame, and accountability. Neighbors who had once been silent now rallied around me, expressing support, admiration, and relief. The story of the HOA Bullies and the locked gate spread quickly through the community, ensuring that their reputation would never recover. What had started as fear, humiliation, and isolation had turned into empowerment, justice, and a powerful lesson. Those who misuse authority always leave themselves vulnerable to the unexpected force of truth. The day after the dramatic confrontation, the neighborhood felt different. Whispers of disbelief and admiration replaced the fear that had hung over the streets for weeks. The HOA Bullies, once so confident and untouchable, were now quiet, avoiding eye contact and retreating behind their office doors. The legal ramifications followed quickly, with the evidence compiled by my brother, emails, photos, records of fines, and witness testimonies. The HOA board faced a formal investigation. Officials confirmed that many of their actions were not only unethical, but illegal, from backdated fines to unauthorized restriction of property access. Public outrage grew. Local news outlets picked up the story, reporting on the abuse of power and the shocking way the situation was resolved. Neighbors who had previously stayed silent stepped forward, sharing their own experiences and supporting the case. The HOA's reputation crumbled as more stories of bullying and intimidation surfaced. The board members who had targeted me were reprimanded and forced to step down. Some faced legal consequences, fines, and public censure. Their attempts to assert authority through intimidation had backfired completely, leaving them humiliated and powerless. For me, the relief was profound. I could finally enter my home freely, walk through the gate, and enjoy the life I had built without fear. The neighborhood, once a place of anxiety and tension, became a symbol of justice and community resilience. Neighbors began to support one another openly, empowered by the realization that bullies could be held accountable. To celebrate the victory and the restored peace, I hosted a small gathering at my home. Neighbors, once distant and cautious, came together to share stories, laughter, and solidarity. My brother's presence, which had been the catalyst for justice, was honored quietly by the community. People thanked him for stepping in, for turning what seemed like a hopeless situation into a lesson of courage, accountability, and integrity. The incident left a lasting impression on everyone involved. The HOA learned a vital lesson: intimidation and abuse of power have limits, and the consequences of targeting the wrong person can be severe. The neighborhood was stronger, more connected, and more vigilant against injustice. And for me, the story became more than a personal victory. It became a testament to the power of family, courage, and standing up for what is right. I had been locked out, humiliated, and isolated, but through resilience and support, justice had arrived from the last person the bullies expected. My home, my sanctuary, was safe once again. The gate now symbolized not oppression, but triumph. The triumph of truth over intimidation, of courage over fear, and of justice over abuse. The story closed not with fear, but with hope. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, the right person at the right time can turn the tide completely.